How's it going, guys? So today we're going to be going over meet day handling and how to be an effective handler for your athlete. So if you've ever been to a powerlifting meet, I'm sure you can agree that there are way too many people going 4 or 5 for 9. They're not matching their lifts in training. They're not hitting the numbers that they expected to hit on the platform, or they're just bombing out entirely and they're not able to put up a total at all. So 99% of the time, this is just going to be due to poor planning, not coming to the meet prepared, or just not being objective about their strength on the day and making bad calls about what goes on the bar. So as a handler, it's your job to be objective for your athletes so they don't have to be the one making those calls and to make the meet run as smoothly as possible for them so that they don't have to think about anything except for lifting weights. So in this video, we're going to go over kind of step-by-step process about what your thought process should be before meet day, leading up to the meet, and on meet day to ensure that your lifter has the best meet day possible. So if the lifter that you're handling on meet day is a client of yours and you coach them, your job starts well before they actually step on the platform. I don't mean just writing their training and helping them get stronger. I mean making sure that they're aware of all of the expectations that are going to be set on them once meet day actually comes and what the referees are going to be looking for in terms of just following the rules of a powerlifting meet. One of the most common reasons I see people miss lifts, especially missed openers, is due to them just not meeting the standard that's expected of them. Whether that be squatting high, missing commands, not following the bar down to their deadlifts. These are all things that are completely avoidable and not strength issues. It's just a matter of making sure that you're matching the expectations that's expected on the platform within your own training. Now, a lot of the times, if you ask someone what are the rules on squat if they have just missed a squat on depth, they'll be able to tell you what the rules are and what the expectations are for depth. If they miss a lift on commands, they'll be able to tell you what the commands are. It's just the fact that they haven't had someone hold them accountable in their training and call them out when they've hit a lift that's subpar that makes them unable to match that on the platform. Because in a high pressure scenario, you're always just going to revert back to what you're used to doing. So not having those things ingrained in the way that you train is just setting yourself up for failure when you actually step on the platform, because those things aren't going to come second nature to you. I can't tell you how many times I'll see a lifter hit a huge PR in training that is completely substandard, whether it be a high squat or a bench that's not paused, and their coach just doesn't call them out for it because they either don't want to ruin the mood after after their client hits a big PR and they want to keep morale high, or they just want to avoid confrontation in general. Your client is paying you to be an objective eye over their training. You need to be comfortable holding them accountable and calling them out when lifts are not too standard in the gym. You're only doing them a disservice down the line when they get to meet day and they're not able to match any of their lifts on the platform that they've hit in training because they haven't been lifting to standard in training. So first things first, you need to be comfortable calling your athlete out when they're not training to standard. But you also need to put them in a position where they can mimic a competition setting as much as possible and be comfortable running through that routine. So most people's training is going to be organized in a way where they'll have a primary session on each lift, or at least one day that gets loaded the heaviest, and they have their most specific set on that training session. So it's a good idea to run through commands frequently on that day so that they're used to listening to the ref and used to knowing when to squat, rack, start, press, rack, and all of that. If you're not familiar with the rules of the federation that your athlete is competing in, then you should 100% read up on the lifter handbook for that federation. I assume that most people watching this video are going to be either competing in or just involved with the USAPL. So I'll link the USAPL lifter handbook in the description to this video. But if you are not up to date with all of those guidelines and all of those standards that are going to be present at the powerlifting meet, then your lifter is not going to feel comfortable with you being an authority on the day and being the one making decisions. So again, if you're not familiar with all of the rules of competition and all of the standards that the lifts need to be to, you 100% need to read up on what those rules are and be 100% confident in your knowledge going into the meet. Okay, so provided that your lifter has been lifting to competition standard all the way through prep, you're nearing the end of the prep, all of the heaviest lifts are done, and meet day is getting pretty close. You want to make sure that you have a fully laid out plan for what's going to happen on meet day for every single weight that's going to go on the bar, every rep that's going to get done by your client. That's obviously going to include first, second, third attempts with ranges for all of those. So you want to have bottom end, middle, and high end ranges for the opener, the second attempt, and the third attempt. But you also want every single warm up with rest periods timed out. So similar to what I was talking about, you want to mimic a competition setting in your athlete's training. You want to be able to mimic the setting of a typical training session as much as you can once meet day actually comes. That means taking the same jumps that you would typically take up to a heavy set. That means taking the same rest periods that you typically would. That means giving yourself enough time before actually getting under a bar to do any warm-ups, any foam rolling, any stretching that you would normally do before actually starting your workout. So let's start with how to write a reasonable attempt sheet and plan out openers, seconds, and thirds in a way that both the coach and the client can agree on the plan. Because a lot of the time, when you get to the end of prep, all the heaviest lifts are done. There's still going to be some kind of disagreement on what the client wants to hit versus what the coach expects the client to hit. Now, obviously, as a coach, you are the one that gets the final say. You are the one that gets to decide what goes on the bar, but you still need to have that conversation to make sure that there are no surprises and to make sure you're on the same page about what the expectations actually are. Now, as a coach, 9 times out of 10, you're going to know what the athlete's top end is. You're the one that's watching their training objectively and unemotionally. A client is usually going to be a little bit more emotionally driven with what they want to hit on the platform. If they've been really trying to get a 500-pound deadlift and they've hit 485 in training and it was an RPE 10, they're definitely going to want to hit that 500-pound deadlift. That's probably going to be what their top end third is planned to be. As a coach, if you genuinely do not think that's there, you need to have a conversation with your client and say, hey, that hasn't been shown in your training. You have not lifted that. You haven't lifted this weight to a competition standard. As close as you may be to a milestone number, we need to stay realistic and stay within the confines of what we know you can hit in order to minimize the risk of missing lifts, because that's what's going to be the biggest detriment to your total, is overreaching a little bit too much and just causing a missed lift and being stuck with either your second attempt or even your first attempt if you're really overreaching. So most of the time, and there are going to be some caveats to this, but most of the time, what you're trying to do for your third attempt is going to match your best lift to standard in training. So you want to take what have we proven in training that we can hit to competition standard and try to match that on the platform with all three. So try to get your best lifts from training all to get done on the same day. Now, again, there are some caveats to that. If you have a lifter who you know tapers really well, you've coached them into several meets before, you know that you can expect 7.5 to 10 kilos on their deadlift through the tapering process, then yeah, maybe you can expect a bit more than they've hit in training on the platform. Or the other way around, if someone has a really finicky lift, maybe it's a really high arch, highly technical bench or a super wide stance sumo deadlift that may be prone to failing on balance or things like that that are a little bit harder to control, you may reduce that top end a little bit just to make things more predictable. So once you and the client have come to an agreement on what the planned third attempts should be, it's not too hard to work backwards from there to determine reasonable openers and second attempts. So a good rule of thumb is you can go 5% on each jump. Now that's going to mean if you're taking 100% for your third attempt, 100% of your 1 rep max, then your second attempt should be in that 95 to 96% range, and your opener should be in that 90 to 91% range. You may have heard people say that an opener should be an RPE 8, a second attempt should be an RPE 9, and a third attempt should be an RPE 10. That is not a good rule. RPE 8 is definitely too heavy for an opener and a little bit closer to that 1 rep max than we want to be on a first attempt. So that opener is there to get into the meet and to solidify your ability to move forward and continue competing, right? We want that to be a lift that you could hit under any circumstances on any day, and there'd be no real risk of you missing the lift. So if we're going to go RPE on the first attempt, it's probably going to be closer to that RPE 5 to 6 range and not really pushing towards that RPE 8 plus on an opener. As I stated earlier, you're going to want to have ranges for each of those attempts. So you want to have a bottom end, a top end, and then that expected range that you expect them to be in for the first, second, and third attempt. You can never be 100% sure of how strong they're going to show up on the day. You can just have as educated of a guess as possible. So being able to have that wiggle room in terms of selecting attempts can be super helpful. So you can think of it like 1% on either side of the percentages that we were talking about earlier. So if the expected third attempt is 100% of their 1 rep max, going on 1% of either side of that would be 99 to 100%, 99 to 101% of their 1 rep max for the expected third attempt range. Second attempt would be 94 to 96%, and then their opener is in that 89 to 91% range. Again, we want to make the athlete's meet day experience as consistent with a typical training session as possible. So what's just as important as planning out a reasonable first, second, and third attempts is planning out their entire warm-up process from start to finish. So that's going to include what weights they take, rest periods, and everything they do before actually getting under a barbell. So a really good idea is to have your athlete time their rest periods in their training, track what weights they take on each given lift, how many warm-ups they take, as well as how long it takes for them to get under a bar after walking into the gym. We want to make that whole process as similar as possible to a typical training session because we want to limit variables as much as possible. If we want performance to be as predictable as possible, we want as little noise and as little new things going on as possible. So keeping things as consistent as we can with a typical training session is going to help us achieve that predictability that we want on the platform. So at this point, your athlete has been training all through prep to a standard that needs to be upheld on the platform. You have written out an attempt sheet that your athlete and yourself have both agreed on. It has first, second, and third attempts all laid out. There are ranges for each of those attempts. All of the warm-ups, including weights and rest periods, are written out and planned, and that's going to include any warm-ups that need to get done preceding your athlete actually getting under a barbell. If you can do all of that properly, you're just going to set yourself up for a good meet day. That's the hard part. But you still need to go into the meet and execute, right? So now we're going to get into how to actually execute on meet day. Not going to get into really the workings of a powerlifting meet and the schedule of it. There's a lot of videos that go over that on YouTube already, and it's just listed in the Lifter Handbook for the Usapl. So assuming that you know how a powerlifting meet runs, we're really going to go over how to make sure that you're pacing correctly and moving with the pace of the meet and able to navigate lifting cast and what lifting cast is and all of that. Once meet day has come, your athlete is weighed in, they've submitted their openers, and you are sitting around waiting to warm up until lifting starts. So how do you know when to start lifting? How do you know when to start warming up? How do you know when to start the whole process and the timing of it all? So you're going to need to know how to navigate lifting cast. That is most likely the website/software that the meet director is going to be using to hold all of the data that's relevant to the meet. So that's going to be the roster, that's going to be flights, sessions, order of lifters, body weight attempts, and all of that, placing. So you're going to want to be familiar with that website and know how to navigate it to plan your attempts accordingly. So we're going to take a look at that website, run through kind of a mock meet that's up and running right now, and take a look at how that all works. Okay, so this is lifting cast. This is going to have all the powerlifting meets that are going on any given day. We'll just pick one and kind of use it as an example moving forward. So let's say you're competing at the Iron Pumpkin Brawl in 2023 USA Powerlifting. So first thing you're going to want to do is go to the top left, click on these three lines, and then go to the platform that your athlete's competing on and click board. So in this case, there's only one platform, so we're going to click board on platform 1, and this is going to show us the entire roster for that platform in each flight. So as I'm sure you already know, state lifting starts at 8 a.m. The first squat by flight A is going to get taken at 8 a.m. They're going to run through first, seconds, and thirds, and then move straight on to flight B. And once every single flight finishes their squats, in this case there are 3 flights, there's going to be a 10-minute intermission, and then they're going to move on to bench, starting at flight A. So in reality, after everyone puts in their openers, this is going to get reorganized, so the lowest opener goes first and the heaviest opener goes last. But for this explanation, we'll just pretend that openers are already put in, and this is the actual order that everyone's going to be competing in. So let's say that we're handling Braden. So Braden is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th in the lineup. Kevin is the first opener. So if lifting starts at 8 a.m., we know that Kevin is going to take his opening squat at 8 a.m. And if we look at each name as 1 minute, that's kind of a rule of thumb you can go by. Each attempt is going to be about 1 minute long. Now, that's not always going to be entirely accurate, but since you can't predict the exact length of each attempt and you want to use these names as kind of your measuring stick for how long it's going to take to get to your lifter, we need some kind of general gauge as to how long it's going to take. So 1 minute is generally accurate enough. So if you're 5th in the lineup, that means that you're most likely going to be taking your attempt at 8 a.m., 8:01, 8:02, 8:03, 8:04 a.m. Now, that's when we want to, that's the kind of the baseline that we want to start our warm-ups from and measure back from. So say Braden needs to take 5 warm-ups and he wants 6 minutes of rest in between each warm-up. So the first warm-up with a bar on your back should be taken 30 minutes before that 8:04 mark. So 7:34, right? And now working back from 7:34, we want to give him enough time to do any warm-up he needs to do before he actually gets under a bar. So once you've timed all of your warm-ups in the gym, in terms of how long it takes you to walk in the door and get under a bar, we want to give him that same amount of time to start warming up before he gets under a bar at the meet. So say it takes him 25 minutes to actually get under the bar. And then you just want to work back from that initial warm-up starting point, maybe give him a few extra minutes of wiggle room. So you start warming up with the non-barbell stuff at 7:05 a.m. and then get under the bar at 7:34. And you want to follow those same principles and that same kind of strategy for the rest of the day. For squat, bench, and deadlift, it's really the same approach for all 3 lifts, where you want to just use lifting cast to see where you are in the meet, see which lifter is going at that time, see how many lifters away from your athlete you are, with intermission times included, and then you can gauge your warm-ups based on that. As long as you know how to read and navigate lift and cast, you'll always know where you are within the meet and how to time your warm-up jumps appropriately. Once you've determined that start time for your athlete, once that time hits, everything else should really fall into place. You only need to follow the plan that you've already laid out. So a lot of people think that the most skilled aspect or the most difficult part of being a meet day handler is making the right call about the attempts on the day, when really that's the easy part. Because like I said, everything should fall into place right after you take that first warm up, because everything's laid out for you. You know exactly what to put on the bar. You know exactly when to put it on the bar. You know when to tell them to take their attempts. So once they hit that last warm up and they go onto the platform, that should be your moment of stress relief, because all of the hard work is already done. Now you just need to look at performance on the day and be objective about your calls and refer to the attempt sheet that you've already laid out. You know your athlete, you've watched their training all through prep, you know what their top end is. So making objective calls about what their strength is on the day shouldn't be very hard. I think a good rule of thumb to kind of defer to when you're unsure about what the attempt should be is always go 2.5 kilos lower. If you're debating between two numbers and you're unsure of which one to go with, all that really means is you're unsure if they actually have that higher number. And you don't want to load anything on the bar that you're not certain is going to get 3 white lights. So if you're ever unsure about which weight to put and you're debating between two weights, barring you're going for a qualifying total or trying to win a meet or trying to break a record, 100% of the time you can go, or you should go, for that lower end of the range. I think a lot of athletes go into meets with the goal of going 9 for 9, when in reality, I don't think that should be the goal. I think that should just be the expectation. Again, barring certain situations where you would need to reach for certain numbers, trying to hit a qualifying total, trying to break an American record, trying to place at a higher level meet, if you're just competing against yourself, or if you're a handler that's just trying to help your athlete break their last PR total, there really shouldn't be much room for error in terms of loading things onto the bar that might be misses. You want to maximize the total by ensuring that you hit all 9 lifts, even if it means leaving 2.5 kilos in the tank on some of the lifts. I don't think that going 9 for 9 should be viewed as this mythical thing that only happens every once in a while. I think if you have an objective plan that has been laid out ahead of time, and you have an athlete that has been training to standard all through prep, and you've been holding them accountable to substandard lifts and letting them know when their lifts are not to competition standard, and that you have an attempt plan that makes sense, that's consistent with the numbers that they've hit in training, if you have a warm-up plan that's consistent with what they've done in training, then meet day performance should be extremely predictable, and that you should know pretty much exactly what needs to go on the bar in order for them to go 9 for 9 and maximize their total. So that just about does it. As you can see, most of the work that goes into leading your athlete into a successful meet and being an effective meet day handler gets done well before meet day actually comes. As long as you have a solid plan laid out and objective and realistic third attempt goals that is consistent with what your athlete has hit in training, and you're putting them in a position in the warm-up process to be consistent with what they've done in their training, then there really shouldn't be much issue on meet day. It's when you come into these meets with crazy expectations, and when you come to these meets unprepared, not knowing how the meet runs, not knowing how to go with the pace of the meet, that's when you see these 3 or 4 for 9 meets, or just bomb outs that are completely avoidable if they had just come in with a better plan and if they come in with more realistic expectations. So if you have any questions, please leave in the comments below. If you have any disagreements, please do the same. But that is all for today. I hope it was helpful, and I'll see you later.